Okay, thank you. Salamat pagi. Are you working to increase resilience to climate change and reduce poverty in the agriculture sector? Would you like to double the impact of your research, your programs or your policies? If the answer is yes, then I have the theme for you. The evidence is abundant and clear. Initiatives that are proactively designed and delivered to include women and men have much greater reach and impact. So there's no longer a question of why, but how. And this theme is going to tell you how to bring women and men into the frame to boost the impact of your research. And I would also say, to be provocative, but I do believe this, it will boost the rigour of your science. So I have a question for you to consider. What do gendered social relations and anthropogenic climate change have in common? I'm going to give you a few minutes to ponder that. And while you ponder, I'm going to tell you what this theme is and what this theme is not. This theme is not aimed at gender researchers, those social scientists that have spent years studying the theories of gendered social relations. They are, of course, welcome to come along, but the focus of this theme is to provide examples of tested, actionable steps that lead to structural change and foster transdisciplinary research that empowers not just male farmers and not just men in the food system, but female and male farmers, female and men in the food system. So you will not be listening to a mini lecture on the theoretical paradigms and works of Butler and Kristeva and Gibson and Waring. You'll be hearing about collective action, enabling environments, and how gender equality benefits women and men. And you might be surprised to hear this, but a more equitable world offers many advantages to men. As soon as we say gender, people often get quite scared. It evokes a lot of fear. So in this theme, you're going to hear about how it's not scary, how you're not going to lose out in a zero-sum power game, and how we will float all boats together. There are definite advantages for men. So come along to our theme. The idea is not to make you a gender researcher. That takes many years. The theme is aimed at biophysical scientists, policy influencers, and those in the development sector. We want to open a window on what is possible when you collaborate with social scientists, when you step over the disciplinary boundary line and dare to engage with a different ontological perspective, when you dare to bring disparate views and ways of thinking together to create something that's greater than its constituent parts, to create genuinely transdisciplinary research, which we know is the fast track to incubating innovation. So I have an important point on terminology. Women does not equal gender. So if gender is not just about women, I was going to invite a man up onto the stage to get a bit of balance, but I see I've already got some chaps up here. Would any of you like to have a go at just very quickly explaining the difference between gender and women and men? Okay, I've got a man I prepared earlier. Andrew Campbell, the CEO of ACR, is a male champion of change. I've got 30 seconds left. Andrew, could you pop up just very quickly and give us your view?
Thanks, Jayne. Well, I think sex is something you're born with. You're male or female or something else. Gender is entirely socially constructed. So that's something that we've socially invented, and it's not biological at all. So that's my understanding of the distinction, Jayne.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Take a seat. Okay, so now we know what gender is. So I'll come back to my question now. What do gendered social relations and climate change have in common? Does anyone want to have a go at answering that question? Both are created by humans. And herein lies the power of where we now find ourselves. The way to end gender discrimination is to eliminate sexism. Humans created sexism, and we can end sexism, but our current structures and institutions have failed. Similarly, addressing anthropogenic climate change is very achievable, but again, I suggest it is our structures and institutions that are failing to adequately marshal our efforts to be responsible stewards of our planet. How can institutions deliver an enabling environment for climate-responsive, nimble government and governance that is required to ensure that humans don't just survive in the Anthropocene, but that they thrive. My conclusion is that ultimately nations and people can adapt more rapidly and more effectively only if we address gender discrimination and have both women and men fully represented and engaged. The setup's not quite right. I wanted to invite my co-presenters from Theme 1 up here on stage, but I'll just mention their names. It's Sophia, David, John, Nitia, Tripti, Dominika, Faye, Mutiti, Nana, and Annette is our rapporteur. Saya juga mau ungkapan semoga saya tidak bicara terlalu cepat kepada teman-teman di sini dari Indonesia. Itu agak susah, saya menjadi sangat terlalu senang kalau saya bicara tentang ini. So kalau saya bicara terlalu cepat, semoga ada kesempatan kita bisa ngobrol masing-masing keluar situasi di sini. Panggil saya atau teman lain dari tema ini. So what you're going to get from this theme to wrap up is knowledge and actionable steps that will boost the rigour and impact of your research, your programs and your policies. We will look forward to seeing you back in this room today at 2 o'clock and then again tomorrow. Thank you very much.
That's a great pitch to follow. Try my best. Yeah, so I and Dr. Anthony Whitbread, we are co-convening this theme called Digitally Enabled Climate Information Services. So the session generally, in general, probably we all agree that agriculture is way behind in comparison to other sectors in the application of ICTs. And traditional extension models are both expensive and probably are not geared enough to be responsive to dynamically changing environments and thus enable informed decision-making at the last mile. But fortunately, you have examples of digital technologies revolutionizing personalized service delivery and decision-making at the last, at the last mile. Take the example of Uber, right? It kind of gives you an ability to make a decision at the last mile, considering something that's happening at a global scale. Similarly, Amazon, right? So the session, pardon me, I'm just trying to, work from my notes. So, back in Hyderabad, India, I lead a very interesting research program called Digital Agriculture. And there are a couple of interesting projects that we executed in the recent past. One is called the Intelligent Systems Advisory Tool, which we did in collaboration with Microsoft and the government of Andhra Pradesh. Another is a mobile app that we developed for the Indian Meteorological Department. It's called Meghdoot. And we have some very interesting insights and observations and learnings from both these pieces of work that we had executed. And we have thus designed this particular session, which is actually spanning over 2 days. The session today is being convened by Anthony and I. The session tomorrow is being convened by Olam. What we want to really understand is how do you use digital technologies and ICTs to basically contextualize information for the farmer. That is, how do you blend the global knowledge with the local realities of a smallholder farmer and thus deliver real-time crop and location-specific advisories, which are a lot more actionable. Second big theme that we'd like to harp on in our session is how do you bring in automation and scalability? I think in the morning it was clear that there are going to be about 700 million smallholder farmers by the year 2030, right? How do you really create or provision climate-informed services that can really offer that contextualization at the last mile? Third, and I think very important, how do you bring in the sustainability from a business standpoint? How do I provision climate information services, not on a project-by-project basis, but more as a sustained business model? So we are going to touch briefly upon the ideas of bundling and providing value chain services so that people, the actors involved in provision of climate information services deliver climate information services. They have an incentive in delivering that, but they make their revenues or profits from some other stream. So we'll probably touch upon this. But broadly, to keep the session interesting and to bring a lot more rigor, the way we have also designed the session is we have 3 presenters, 3 scientific presentations. After that, we have designed a debate. But just to bring in some rigor and some intensity in the debate, we have identified about 5 poster presenters who are presenting on topics, who have posters relevant to these topics. And the way we have structured the session is that we'll have a discussion point, and we'll have a poster presenter who's going to give a quick 2-minute overview of their presentation, so that the elements in the presentation are going to inform the debate. Essentially, I think the end result that we want to get out of this particular session is, of course, get a nice framework going in really trying to understand what are the drivers, what are the barriers to the adoption of digitally enabled climate-informed services. But we would also like to catalyze and mobilize some very interesting partnerships that really can help us achieve this notion of climate-informed services at scale. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mario Herrero, and I'm here to try to convince you to come to our session. Our session is about the technologies, the current ones and future ones. We have a really exciting agenda for you, covering a lot of what we call potentially transformative technologies, and these are prospective technologies that will be ready almost now or in the next 10 years. So we'll collectively be able to learn about these different technologies that span across the food system. And we're also going to be able to give you a good snippets of what's happening with current technologies. We have some really exciting speakers that are going to showcase some of these and how they work in their systems and so on. As Bruce mentioned, this is all about scaling up these different technologies. We have plenty of examples of where, look, the pilot scales, but the pilot never fails, but the pilot never scales. So we really need to move from this very, very quickly. The fact that we're working on food systems makes it really exciting, because all these technologies, and especially the new ones, they really span the whole food system, from production all the way to consumption. So we really need to consider all of these. So what have we done? We've done a whole inventory of what's coming up. These are about 80 technologies that you'll manage to learn about. These are, look, they span from trying to get cereals to behave like legumes, trying to produce feed from sewage, and a range of others, including plant substitutes for meats, etc. So this is going to be quite exciting, because what we want you to help us with is to try to prioritize them, try to think of the impact pathways by which these technologies might materialize in different systems. And for this, we've structured the session as a series of scenarios and social games. We managed to bring some of the leading people working on scenarios and gaming to participate in the sessions. So this is going to be fully interactive. We really expect you to be hands-on and really engaging in this very deep discussion. So what will you get? You'll learn about what's coming up in the next 10 years or so. You'll help us prioritize all these different potential interventions, and you also get to know some really cool new methodologies that you could implement further. So please come, we need you.
Hi everyone, my name is Enda. I'm your money guy. Does that work? No? I'm supposed to whet your appetite. The session is all about money, but not just about money. It'll be about how money comes into climate smart agriculture. To get to anywhere close to what you guys will consider climate smart, you need a lot of money, not just bilateral, but also from the private sector. Because in order to have impact, the investment's got to be at scale. In order for the investments to work, it needs to be cheap. And in order to be cheap, it needs to be at scale. Often the case, we think about policies, and the second generation CSA thinkers come and say, oh, we need to talk about business process. But now here's the third generation, the millennial CSAs who come, business processes, policies does not guarantee a transaction. So we're going to talk about how do we bring a transaction parallel to the sequential thinking that policies ensure transaction, which is not always the case. And this is the right time to talk about it. Why? Because until 2019, the total amount of green bond has increased from around 150 billion to 250 billion US dollars. And one said, that's a huge margin to talk about. Yeah, it is, because there's a different way of putting a taxonomy on what green projects are all about. Yet the impacts are still questioned, and often questioned, what does that green project bring? Now, the session will mention a lot of emphasis on Indonesia, given that as of today, Indonesia is hosting the world, Asia's largest green bond investment. But also because even though Indonesia's per capita carbon emission is still low, given the intensity of the sector and how much it will grow, the yield will be big. So now's the time to invest. And having said that, the discussion will not just be about how money works. How does money get channeled from big banks in Europe, big banks in Americas, big banks in Asia to the small farmers in Asia and Indonesia? But what are the enabling factors to produce a transaction? Because one thing that we as humans have is a culture of copy-paste. So when it works in transaction number one, most likely it will work in transaction number two. When sector one has one transaction, 2 or 3 transactions, it's easier to copy-paste it to other transactions. Hopefully that whets the appetite. A lot of the details are in your app. Feel free to look at it. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is a cinnamon roll that I picked up at the coffee break. Very delicious. I'd just like you to think of all the things that must have happened to get this in my hand today. What we're talking about is the food system. We're talking about the whole range of activities and actors that have been involved in that. Sure, production of the wheat for the flour, the almonds, the cinnamon, the sugar. But then what? It's all very well that staying in the field, but it has to be taken through a process to end up in my hand. And in that process, there are embedded a huge number of livelihoods. There are environmental issues. There are health issues, not only from the final consumption, but the health and safety of all the people involved in that chain. So here we are, we're talking about food system transformation. What actually do we mean by that food system? Think of all the processes, all the activities, but think of all the outcomes of those activities. The outcomes for enterprise, the outcomes for livelihoods, both big, small enterprises, big, small producers, but all the other people involved. We've got the primary processing. We've got the people who then take those, the flour. We're not talking about wheat anymore, we're talking about flour, and they turn that through a bakery process, etc., etc. So all the actors, including the wonderful staff here in the hotel who are involved in the hospitality, and indeed all ourselves as consumers, are equally involved in the food system. So when we're talking about reshaping the supply chain, what on earth are we going to do? Where do we start? Well, we start by thinking about what is that supply chain and not forgetting that it's a large and complex set of issues. But the opportunities for bringing about that system change, Sonia referred to procurement. The power of governments, both local and national, to address procurement agendas, to change the way that we are eating, but also the way that the system is working is really enormous. The opportunity to change the way we retail food. What is the role of advertising and marketing? Again, Sonia was referring to the tobacco issue, but one could see a very similar issue emerging perhaps with some of our food stuff. So in this session, what we're going to do is two things. We've got a menu in 2 parts. On the first session, we'll be talking about the supply chain itself. And we've got 5 really excellent papers which will review a whole range of issues which bring it up to the point of this holding in my hand. And then the next day, for the second course, my colleague Bill Bellotti from University of Queensland will be chairing 4 papers which will be thinking about consumption. So let's look at the chain, if you will, from the other end. Talk about what we eat, why we eat it, and how we can change those habits in order to enhance all the positive aspects from this food sector and minimize the negative ones. The power is arguably with us as consumers, but how do we bring about that societal change? It's heavy stuff. The objectives really are to review the series of these case studies, but to think about it in terms of identifying the information need, both for the practice and the policy, to bring about system change. And so to help us do that, we've got a wonderful panel, people from a range of types of organization, Indonesian LIPI, the Indonesian Research Institute. We've got somebody from the Global Research Alliance, an international agenda. We've got somebody from Bappenas, one of the Ministry of Planning here in Indonesia. And we've got an NGO represented from Scholars of Sustenance, who are absolutely key in minimizing food waste by redirecting it to people who need it. So what we'll be doing is discussing with you, the audience, the sorts of information needs you think are necessary, but also the role you as researchers, policy people, NGOs can contribute to food system transformation. And we'll be meeting in Batur room 1 and 2, which is just along the corridor here, and we'll be doing that on later today and tomorrow. And we look forward to seeing you. So thank you very much for that.
Good morning. The title of theme 6 is Fostering Enabling Policies and Institutions. And we were asked to make a pitch for our sessions. As far as I'm concerned, I think Bruce probably did a much better job than I will. Because of all the themes, this perhaps, if I may paraphrase him, is the mother of all themes. But getting serious, an important message coming out of the UN Climate Action Summit a couple of years ago, which reflects a growing global consensus, is the need to transform the current food system from being not fit for purpose to one that ensures sustainable food future for all. This global challenge actually makes this conference extremely important, not only extremely important and highly relevant, but also very timely. But how do we achieve this? I think we'll hear a lot about this over the next couple of days. But to be clear, the food systems are transforming, and they have been transforming since the 1960s. And the transition from food scarcity to food surplus, at least at the global level and in many countries at the national level, if not everywhere at the micro level, is a remarkable achievement that needs to be celebrated. But the now new business as usual is also putting stresses on the food system. On the one hand, it is inadvertently increasing the vulnerability of the food system to climate change, but also pushing the planet beyond its current carrying capacities, especially in terms of adding to GHG emissions, the mitigation agenda, and also biodiversity loss, which threatens the very food security which the current system is designed to deliver. To tackle this challenge, all of the issues, the mother comment notwithstanding, all of the issues and questions raised in the 5 thematic tracks are extremely important and highly relevant. But an equally important, and perhaps as economists might argue, perhaps even more important, a more fundamental issue, is an issue that cuts across all of these dimensions. That is of the enabling environment, the policies and institutions that are needed to support the transformation of the food system. How do we make this happen? Are the conditions in place to create the incentives facing decision makers in the food system, from farmers, who are essentially private actors, to actors along the value chain, and finally to the consumers, as Sonia so rightly pointed out this morning? The food system works as a whole, and the farmers respond to the incentives that they face and the demands that they face. Is the food system, are there conditions in place for all of these actors to act in a manner that contributes rather than detracts from a climate-smart food system? Yet, while much attention has been focused on the need to make agriculture and the food system more climate-smart, and we already have a large stockpile of knowledge and technologies, the question is, why is this not happening at the scale? It is happening in many places, but why is it not happening at the scale that we need to bend the arc on climate change? In part, it's perhaps because much less discussion, as well as analytical and experiential attention has been focused on the need on the question of how to make this happen. What kind of enabling environment do we need to ensure that innovations and practices are adopted and behaviors modified to scale up CSA? This is important because the current policy enabling environment, or the rules of the game, are pushing the food system to a point where, as was pointed out at the Climate Action Summit, is making the current food system not fit for purpose. What does that mean? The details are going to be laid out by Martin, who's chairing the session, Martin van Nieuwkoop, the Global Director for Agriculture at the World Bank. He'll be chairing the session, setting the scene this afternoon at 2. Just to give you a couple of brief snippets, the current hidden costs of the global food system are estimated to be about $6 trillion. This includes not only the environmental damage, but also the costs in terms of malnutrition and overnutrition, obesity. This is about double the cost of value added, economic value added in the agricultural system, as global agricultural system as a whole, and about 3/4 of the entire global food system. And paradoxically, this is not because of neglect of agriculture. We like to think that funding going to agriculture is not enough. But if you look closely, and based on data available for 53 countries, which account for 2/3 of the global output, the current support to the farmers is nearly $600 billion, which is significantly higher than any of the amount of resources going into climate-smart agriculture or in fact, into climate action. The problem is that much of the support is not delivered in a manner that is consistent with CSA or for the scale-up of CSA. Only 5% is spent on R&D, and about 5% is spent on other public goods. The vast majority is delivered in the form of distortive subsidies or market price supports and market distortions that are pushing the system to do things that are now becoming unsustainable. This is the background and context for the 2 sessions. I know my time is up, so I'll try and wrap up. This is the background and context for the 2 sessions that we have on this theme. One is this afternoon, the other is tomorrow mid-morning. And the first session, they're focusing on priority actions needed to create an enabling and policy and institutional environment to underpin the transformation of the food system. And the second one is a bit more operational, focusing on the hands-on experiences on how operational and implementation challenges have been dealt with in a few country settings. Thank you.